Discussion keeps the world turning.
This is Roundtable.
From the heart of Beijing to the edges of the global stage, you are at Roundtable. I'm Niu Honglin. At a time when many parts of the world are raising trade barriers, one major economy is moving in the opposite direction. China's decision to remove tariffs on imports from 53 African countries is making a clear statement about openness, partnership, and the future of global supply chains. Now, Roundtable invites you to go beyond the headlines to find out who benefits and how deep will the impact go. For today's show, I'm joined by Steve Hatherley and Gao Junya. Hello, Junya. Haven't been talking.
Hold on. Why did she get a Steve Hatherley and Junya?
Because she's not as everyday as you. We haven't talked to her for a while.
I am teasing. She deserves a better reception than I do.
Thank you, guys.
Nice to see you.
Really want our audience to know what you do when you're not doing Roundtable.
Well,
I want to know that too.
Yes, I've been working on a China-Africa related podcast. It's called China-Africa Talk, and it's updated weekly and on different podcast platforms. And apparently this week, we're also going to dissect this important topic, that is China's zero tariff treatment to African countries.
Yes, This is something quite major. We know on May the 1st, 2026, China starts to remove tariffs on all imports from 53 African countries with diplomatic ties to Beijing. It is a landmark move that could reshape trade between China and Africa. We know from Kenyan avocados to Ethiopian coffee beans and beyond. We see this policy promises new opportunities for African exporters, Chinese consumers, and business on both sides. That's why we do have to talk about it. And do we know anything more specific about the policy?
Of course, just starting May the 1st, that is this weekend, this Friday actually, China will open its doors even wider to African countries by removing the tariffs on all imports from 53 African countries that have diplomatic ties with China. Africa now has 54 countries, so it's the way majority of African countries will enjoy this policy. And in simple terms, that means African products, be it avocados, coffee, tea, or horticulture products, they will enter the Chinese market without duties.
These products, some of them I think are known. For example, South African wine, I think internationally has a really strong reputation. But for me, avocados from Kenya, I never knew that Kenya was a big exporter and a big grower of avocados.
Of course, a lot of African countries, they have such natural conditions that's suitable for those, let's say, tropical fruits or tropical products. And avocado is one of them. It's not only Kenya, actually. Tanzania, Zimbabwe, you can find it everywhere. Even in our correspondent station back in Harare, we do have an avocado tree.
Oh, nice.
You stayed there for 5 years, right?
Yes, over 5 years.
And there must be something that you got familiar and fall in love with in the African market and you enjoy so much. But here in the Chinese malls or supermarkets, you cannot find them. Any specific examples here?
I'll just start with avocados because here in China, a growing number of people now, they start to consume avocados because it's quite good.
Yeah, and you're
healthy.
seeing them more and more in the supermarkets these days.
And most of them are imported from Latin America, Peru, countries like Peru. But actually, African countries, they do have high quality avocados. And back in Africa, it was very, very cheap. You just can't believe how cheap it could be. With $1, you can get 10 avocados.
Oh.
I'm just giving you an example. You can even get more because if you go to a market and you buy something, fresh groceries, they will just give you some avocados for free.
Just for free.
Yeah, just for free.
I didn't even know avocados grew on a tree. That was new information. I never thought about it before. But yeah, that was cool. Did you get to pick some directly from the tree around
Of course.
Oh, nice.
And our dogs, they love avocados as well. I hate to say this, but this is not offense to our listeners who have a huge appetite for avocados. In certain countries, they would say avocados are, just maybe dog food.
Because it's just
Because
so
it's
cheap
everywhere
and
where-
yeah, the
yes.
volume is unexpected.
Well, I am a happy dog in that case. This isn't brand new, by the way. Back in December of 2024, that's when China developed or introduced zero tariffs for all products from the world's least developed countries that have strong diplomatic relations with the country, and that included 33 African nations. So, the goods that we mentioned are certainly on the list, but there are other things like Beninese pineapples. I'm waiting for Junya to tell a story about Beninese pineapples. Ugandan cocoa beans, Tanzanian sesame seeds. Those already began entering China tariff-free at that time. So this big step on May the 1st in 2026, it's really quite the next step in a broader effort to make this relationship even stronger.
Yes, and it's even earlier than that. I think back in the 90s, China has started to have these kind of preferential policies with the least developed countries in Africa. And in 2010, the items has already been enlarged to over 95%, 2015, 97%, 2021, 98%, and to 2024, like Steve said, it's 100%, but for 33 African countries, and now it's for 53 African countries.
Expanded now. And this year is a big year, too, because it's the 70th anniversary of China-Africa diplomatic relations. So this is an economic milestone for Africa and China, but it's a symbolic milestone at the same time.
Yes, and one thing I found very interesting is that it's not only, well, it is symbolic, but it's not only symbolic. We started the 33 countries tax-free policy in 2024, and by March 2025, China's imports from these countries reached over 21 billion US dollars. That marked a more than 15% year-on-year increase. And also growth has been particularly profound in agricultural commodities. Coffee imports, for example, surged by 70%. Cacao bean imports rose by more than 56%. These all shows that one, we're omitting the tax. It actually makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. You know, I personally would visit different expos, be it China Africa Economic and Trade Expo or the China International Import Expo. And every time I go to such events, I would definitely go to the African section. You mentioned African coffee, Niu. Actually, I've been drinking African coffee all the time, and from the bees, be it from Rwanda, from Burundi, or from Ethiopia. That's the most popularly known. But actually now Uganda's coffee has become the top one exporter of African coffee.
Really?
Yes, it surpassed Ethiopia. They do. All of them, I think they have high quality. And about the the pineapples from Benin.
I knew it was coming.
Africa is huge, right? So when I was there, I actually basically covering news in Southern Africa, and Benin is from West Africa. But I'm just so keen about different countries, and China do have pineapples from Benin now, and but still the prices is a bit high. I think for 3 kg Benin pineapple could cost you around 100 yuan. So, but the quality and the taste is so different. It deserves the so-called title. It's called the sweet bread, I think.
That is pretty expensive, though,
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
I know previously the tax they need to pay would be around 8%. And also when it comes to another type of food that is, I think I am looking at a certain type of food that costs around 14%. Yes, that's the South African wine you talked about. That's 14%. But starting the 1st of May, none of these tariffs are in need.
Yeah, I mean, this is just such a huge benefit for both sides, because for the exporters from Africa, pardon me, it means that now it's a lot easier to access one of the world's largest consumer markets, China here, right? And then from the Chinese side, for customers here, and that includes me, that means more variety on our store our shelves. So if we talk about, the industries or even the products that are likely to benefit the most from this, agriculture and manufacturing is on the list, is pretty high on the list. And in fact, agriculture might be the first sector to feel those benefits. Citrus from South Africa, different types of tea, rooibos tea, I think is how you say that. I'm not a tea drinker myself. Table grapes are already gaining popularity, apparently, among consumers here in China. And with the tariffs removed on these and other products, then that means that those products are going to be more competitive on supermarket shelves here in Beijing and Shanghai and all over the country. And it means a better deal for both sides. The farmers from Africa, they're going to gain access to a growing market here. And then, like I said, us customers will see a higher variety of goods and we'll see cheaper prices on those goods too.
Yeah, so we've been focusing on food because it's just...
Because we love it.
We love it.
And also because, Africa, the African continent is actually an agrarian continent. Most of the African countries, their key pillar of their economy is agriculture.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Yes, but where I'm heading to is that it's not only food, it's also lifestyle goods and supply chains. Junya, you mentioned pineapple from Benin, but I heard that home decor items such as pineapple fiber cushions can also be one of the product that is truly popular in Africa.
Of course, I think those African people, they are just talented artists, I would say. They could make use of different materials they have on hand and make different artworks, I would say. And like the home decor you mentioned, the cushions.
And hand-woven baskets from Kenya. And for Chinese consumers, instead of viewing these kind of items like a artifact that you only put there as a decor of your house, you can also really use it as a basket, really use it as a cushion because of the lowering of the price. But product is just one thing. Another very interesting aspect people are talking about is that the new trade framework could give a major boost to higher value industries, especially advanced manufacturing.
So for countries like South Africa, for example, that would be particularly important because it supports a broader goal of moving beyond reliance on raw material exports and then building a more diversified and also a more resilient economy overall. So that's a lot of, I guess, economic talk, but in other words, it's not just about selling more oranges or selling more tea or selling more pineapples. It could help drive industrial growth. It could encourage technological innovation, and it could also integrate African businesses more deeply into global supply chains, all the things necessary to help sell more oranges and more tea and more pineapples. And doing all those things in turn, it can help strengthen economic resilience for those African countries, make them stronger. So when things get a little bit difficult, they can bounce back. They're able to do that. And then there's more opportunities for longer term development over maybe the following decades.
Yes, so we're looking at raw material being sold to China and also food sold to China. And when we talk about raw materials, I see another quite fun point that I haven't thought of before doing the research and doing the show. That is, sesame imports from Tanzania can enter the Chinese market. And for example, one specific company in Hunan province, they can use these sesame raw material and make them into very cost-effective oil that they really enjoy. And then some of these products can be sold back to Africa. So that's one way of having the trade work. Another way would be some companies in China would find their way to Africa to start a factory and start process and add some value to these kind of goods and sell them to China. So that is another way of investment. So I'm curious to know, do you think these kind of policies would attract more investment from China to African countries?
Definitely. I think you both mentioned a very important point. That is, when you will get when you speak to African people that about this policy, it's about value addition. It's not about exporting raw materials. It has to be about industrial upgrading. It has to be about producing processed food. And, it's not only about local companies or factories, they produce processed food. Of course, Chinese companies will go there because they can import the products back to China without any tariff. So it gives them a competitive advantage. So that will make sense. So value addition is quite an important point. And, a lot of African countries, they do have a solid industrial base. It just takes more investment to upgrade them and to make good use of the local labor, which is very cheap. I think they will have a long way to go, but it will definitely worth it.
Yeah, and as this relationship continues to grow, you'll probably see more Chinese companies that might set up their factories or their processing facilities in different parts of Africa, closer to where certain goods are produced. And then if they do that, well, if you set up factories in Tanzania or wherever, well, then you're going to need people to work in those factories. So it's going to help out the local economies too.
Definitely. And
the local employment, because Africa is the youngest continent in the world. I think 60% of its population is under 25, and many of them are facing a severe condition that is unemployment.
And when we are sending such a clear statement, a message to Africa, we already are looking at more and more companies going to Africa, start their business. It's not only in manufacturing industry. For instance, we see Chinese companies with a strong presence in Africa expanding to hiring, like Transition has built an ecosystem combining smartphones, mobile payments, and short video platforms, serving more than 200 million users across the African continent. And the market requires talent and local language skills and market knowledge. So Chinese people are going there, creating jobs in Africa. And also in Hunan province, we see Gaoqiao Grand Market developing a source, region, and marketplace model for African products like nuts, spices, in creating demand for professional with expertise in foreign trade, logistics, and product sourcing. All these are happening not directly, like really directly, because of the tariff remove policy, but because tariff policy is just one part of the strengthening of the relationship between China and Africa. And that being said, why is China making such move now? Steve already mentioned that this year is quite a iconic year.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the reasons, but if you look at it from maybe an economic lens, it's because it's good timing. I didn't know that statistic that 60% of the population is under 25 years old. Okay, struggling with unemployment numbers. The only good thing about that is that is a problem that can be fixed with job creation. So you have a large market of people there who are willing and ready to take part. And there's consumer demand, there's expanding industry, there is enormous development potential there. Africa is one of the world's fastest growing regions. And if you open up the market, which it is, wider to African goods, that's what's happening here in China, then this side of things, China, is strengthening trade ties with a continent that is becoming increasingly important in the global economy. So yeah, you can look at it through the diplomatic lens, and that's a really wonderful thing. But if we strictly look at it through an economic lens, the timing is perfect.
I think just this year, so many Chinese people, they are now investing in Africa. It's a growing momentum. And for now, we can see from China's part, because short-term speaking, China is actually forgo around 1.4 billion US dollars when it comes to tariff revenue. But I think it's a forward-looking approach, I would say, because like we said, Africa is a continent rich in agricultural resources and raw materials. So by diversifying import resources, China can actually strengthen its supply chain. And especially when we face this growing global uncertainty. So it's very important to solidify such a source of market. And at the same time, like we said, the more Chinese companies, they will invest in Africa. It will be more attractive for them to build supply chains on the continent. And you know what? They will bring not only employment opportunities, but also knowledge and technology and all the transfer. So it makes a big sense back in the African continent.
I was curious to know, because with this policy, we're definitely going to look at more and more products, different goods coming into the market, going into the Chinese mainland and having more people loving these products. So I talked to someone that I previously interviewed. He is working in the coffee industry in Yunnan. Yunnan is famous for its coffee industry now. It has coffee major in universities. It is exporting a lot of coffee beans and coffee product. And I asked, will this give you a negative, not competitive enough edge? Because we all know that the coffee beans from Africa are really good.
I mean, fair question, because when you do have fair trade, that can make things more difficult for domestic producers.
When you open the market, local producers would face the pressure. I asked them, and they said, to start with, this move is definitely significant, but it's not overnight. We've been looking at this. We talked about 33 countries with no tariffs starting from 24. It's already happening, and we're coping with it. And the way to cope with it is the first step is to cooperate with these African countries, because we can use some of their beans as well. We can invent different types of coffee flavor. And they are also making a move in the direction of using different coffee beans with local characteristics into some recreational cultural product. So they're already moving up on the supply chain or on the industrial chain. It's giving them the pressure, but at the same time, the motivation to find new drivers, new engines in developing their industry. And that's why I'm also asking, yes, we see Chinese local companies and local merchandise facing the problem and meeting or trying to find a way to deal with the challenges. How about the African countries? How about the challenges that they might face?
I guess it would be a different list of potential troubles on that side. There you'd probably be talking about product quality and standards, because when you're exporting to the Chinese market, well, then you have to adhere to the quality standards and safety standards and packaging standards that are required for products to enter into China. So the producers from the African side of things, they may need more support to meet those requirements for agricultural exports, for example, since we talked about that. That could mean different types of traceability requirements, detailed inspection procedures that perhaps would be new, because those products never being shipped to China before. But I mean, those are just things. Once you get those set up and once you get those standards in place, then they're set in place and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
And not to mention, China, such a huge market of 1.4 billion people is open to Africa, but most of the African economies, they have small-scale production. So it is time for them to scale up and
We need more avocados!
And
also motivation.
Yes, to scale up, it's not just about the production. It's about infrastructure. It's about logistics. It's about everything, So
Customs.
Of course.
Customs control. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it sounds funny, but you're talking about you're going to need more customs officers because you're talking about products being sent out that need to be controlled.
Oh, one thing I didn't remember mentioning is that we see also, because of the new policy, there's simplified administrative process. Unlike many preferential trade agreements, this policy does not require additional bilateral agreements or formal exchanges of documents anymore. So, as long as a country has diplomatic relations with China and meets the eligibility criteria, it can automatically benefit from the zero tariff treatment. So, one thing not to worry about. So, that is the easy part.
Yeah, I mean, we make jokes, of course, but Junya made a great point there about production capacity. To use the avocado example, or even coffee or anything, if you want to grow really high quality coffee beans or really high quality avocados, and making sure that quality control is your main number one priority, right? That's one thing. Producing at scale while maintaining that quality control, that's a whole other ballgame. So that could be a serious issue too.
And I don't know, because I heard about the fact that in Africa, they are still sometimes facing the problem of lack of electricity or clean energy. And already there are examples of Chinese companies landing on the African continent and start manufacturing and decided to up-leveling the local infrastructure and even helping establish a electric related power plant, and that is also, I think, going to be a more frequent phenomenon when it comes to the cooperation.
You're right, Niu. Actually, green energy cooperation is definitely one of the growing momentums when it comes to China-Africa cooperation, because power shortages is a huge problem for many African countries, and they do have a huge abundance of clean energy, be it wind, be it solar. So a lot of potential to tap in that area, and we're glad to know that, of course, many Chinese companies have already begun to do that. So it'll take time, but we're getting there.
Yes, and since we want the product to meet China's standards, many local companies have also been talking about inviting talents from China so they can give them the expertise they need, the kind of familiarity with local policy that they might need if they want to export to China. So we're looking at a very bright future of African goods in the Chinese market. Any recommendations for our dear listeners listening to this episode that you think they should, first go and grab it and have a taste and fall in love?
I would go for food, of course, but you just mentioned the cushion, so I will mention something else. Food, I think biltong, that is the dried beef from South Africa.
Like a beef jerky?
Yes, it's beef jerky, but it's totally a different flavor. It's just the South African or Southern African style.
We start with food.
We start with food.
with food in the middle.
Yes.
And another thing I will share is quite interesting. It's actually an inspiration from the pineapple cushion story. Elephant. It's a signature animal from the African continent. And actually,
the big five.
Yes, elephants, their waste, they can't digest their food that much. I think they can only digest 15% of their food. So their waste is a lot of nutrition, a lot to explore, not only for those beetles, but for human beings as well. Because, for example, in Zimbabwe, we could see some paperwork done from elephant waste, albums. Some albums and paper. A lot of artworks can be derived from elephant waste.
Oh.
I wonder about the smell.
No smell at all, dear. I said they can only just
the smell of grass.
I'm sure it's processed somehow before
Definitely.
it's, just flatten it and then write a poem on it.
But it will make a really great gift.
I mean, it's just smart. If it can be done, then why not?
Looking forward to the day when all of these great goods can be found in the Chinese malls.